Hello and welcome back to the Electrified Marina Podcast. I'm your host and producer, Brooks Lawson.
And Erick Pinzon from Electrified Marina.
And today is Monday, February 10th. And this show is brought to you by us at electrifiedmarina.com. Please check out our website and call or email us if you decide you have any interest in buying a new boat or repowering an old one. And please post any questions and comments in the comment section on YouTube. So we're going to be starting out this week with some news. And the first topic is that Electrified Marina will be in Miami.
Yeah, super exciting. It's kind of came together last minute. Mainly Nautical Ventures down there throwing something together. Going to have, I think, 8 or 9 different manufacturers I'm going to be hanging out, but quite a few boats there in the Electric Pavilion. Come check us out.
And then Electrified Marina has a new boat, the Scout 215 Dorado. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, we actually just got that, had some warm weather. We got a chance to put it in the water. Justin from Aqua Electric was actually here. We shot a ton of content. You can check his stuff out on YouTube. But we went out and did a head-to-head test of the X-Shore 1, 2 21-foot boats. It was a lot of fun. We did a couple hole shots and kind of a 18-mile run that we did. But super fun boat. It's a Scout boat powered by Flux-powered train. So it's a 100 horsepower continuous, 150 peak. Has 80, I think it's 84 kilowatt hours of battery, but it's an awesome day boat, just a small bow rider, but perfect for the average pleasure boater. It's a pretty cool boat.
So what's special about it and how does it fit into your lineup?
You know, it fits an interesting spot, and we didn't have anything that was a bow rider historically, and X-Shore 1's coming out with a bow rider. They just released it at Boot a few weeks ago, actually. And we'll be getting that here this summer, but we haven't had a bow rider until now, and it's just a good, normal boat, you know? We've had the big center consoles and hydrofoiling stuff and the small cocktail cruisers, but nothing really in the middle, and it's at a good price point, too. It's $120,000 for 84 kilowatt hours of battery, so in terms of bang for your buck, it is a very good boat.
All right, next up we have a couple of quick news topics. Courtesy of Electric, there's a new company called Vesiv from Auckland, New Zealand, and they just launched the VS9 commercial hydrofoiling transport ferry into operation in Auckland. According to Vesiv, this is the first time in the world that a certified electric hydrofoiling boat has been entered into the commercial fleet for transport services. Although I read this in that article and I was immediately thought of a different boat. And indeed, they did the same publication, Electric, released another article about a week later about the Candela P12. And what they said in that article in the first sentence was, the Candela P12 is the first hydrofoil electric ferry in the world to begin commercial operations. So this was a different author, but it seemed like there was not a lot of fact-checking going on there.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I got him.
I digress. The VS9 will transport its passengers at speeds of 25 knots or around 29 miles per hour and can travel up to 57 miles on a single charge. With its first hydrofoiling boat in operation, Vesiv will look to deploy additional sustainable vessels, but that's not all. The company has shared plans to continue its collaboration with Fuller's 360 and eventually introduce a new vessel into service called the VS18, a 100-seater electric hydrofoiling commuter ferry. Eric, do you have any thoughts on the viability of electric ferries?
It actually makes a ton of sense, man. It's, you know, when it comes to electric, that predetermined use case, that daily route that it's very easy to calculate, very easy to anticipate. It's not changing. You know how long it's going to be in port, loading on and off passengers, perfect for charging. Obviously, you need DC fast chargers at multiple locations, so it could be a costly infrastructure build out. But when it's those use cases, it's super easy to plan ahead as opposed to pleasure boating where it's like, I don't know where I'm going to go today. And then you just go. So, no, very much on like the delivery, the workboat side, the ferry side, it's an awesome application, especially being the hydrofoil side. The reduction in drag is massive. So the battery capacity that's needed is minimal when you go up on foils. You just need enough distance to do that, and obviously the appropriate waterways. But actually, Lake Tahoe is going to be getting one too. I'm not sure where they're at in their RFP or the bidding process, but I did see something in the news is there as well. And I think there's a Candela P12 that's going to be there.
You ever heard of the Wada Hoppa?
Yeah, up in Boston. I've talked to that guy before.
Ferry up there in Boston as well.
He's been pushing pretty hard for it, man. I think he's got a lot of red tape. You do anytime you deal with municipalities. It's not fun.
Yeah, I just thought it was a hilarious name.
Yeah, it's good.
We could definitely use one in Austin. You know, we have, if you're going from Spicewood to Lago Vista, it's like a 5-minute paddle across the river in a boat, but it's like an hour and 20-minute drive to go around because there's no bridge there.
Jeez Louise.
Next topics we have is tariffs. So he really did it. 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico, and 10% on China. 10%, honestly, it could have been worse. 10% is not terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible. And then he immediately undid some of them. I can't honestly keep up with that information. What do you know about that?
I was following it every day for, I think it was 4 or 5 days this last week. And I was like, I'm wasting too much time on this. It's bouncing around. And like half the executive orders, they don't hold any legal ground. Like it just, I don't know. I saw one on like going against paper straws. And it's like, there's no legal sanction here. Like it just doesn't make any sense. So I've given up wasting time on paying attention to it. I'm going to wait for the dust to settle. They're in a weird period with Canada, and like who knows what after the 30 days. So I don't know. We're just focusing on boat sales and events, and we'll just let the noise be noise and just focus on selling boats.
Yeah, I'm not sure the dust is ever going to settle on that one. And then China Uno reversed and added a 15% levy on U.S. coal and liquefied natural gas, and a 10% duty on crude oil and agricultural machinery, which are set to take effect on February 10th. So that's fun.
Oh, it's today.
Yeah, there you go. Next piece of news is courtesy of a publication called New Atlas. So a French startup called Blue Nav has introduced a biomimetic hubless outboard motor. I didn't read this, but I assume biomimetic means like mimicking biology, because the props mimic the shape and contour of a whale fin. In fact, the company calls it a whale-design propeller. It's inspired by the I don't know if I'm saying this right, tubercles on a humpback whale's flippers, which are the bumps on the leading edge. According to an NIH study, the tubercles on the leading edge act as a passive flow control device that improve performance and maneuverability of the flipper. The control of passive flow has the advantages of eliminating complex, costly, high maintenance, and heavy control mechanisms, while improving performance for lifting bodies in air and water. The tubercles on the leading edge can be applied to design of watercraft, aircraft, ventilation fans, and windmills. They say it requires fewer components and less maintenance. It's also retractable. So because it's that hubless kind of motor, it can be sucked back up into the kind of body. It's intended for a hybrid design using 2 electric units and 1 gas unit in the middle, or 2 gas units in the middle. And then they're used as differential thrust. It also adds advanced navigation and a virtual anchor. They go from 8 to 15 kilowatts. So we're seeing these hubless designs more and more often. What do you think about those?
It's interesting between, AC, DC motors, axial flux, this style. Motors are already super efficient. But I think it just depends on the application. I think I saw these, a big use case for these like bow thrusters almost on yachts, but the amount of power they put out is pretty significant. Once you start talking 15 kilowatts, that's a good amount of power. But I didn't see the efficiency numbers on this one, or if it's any better. I mean, most motors are 95% efficient already. And it's funny you mentioned the fin design on that. And I thought like it caught some debris the first time I saw one and thought it got like turned up, but like, nope, Mother Nature figured this out for us already. It's efficient, call it aerodynamic or what have you, but it's pretty cool that they took that and applied it to it. But I want to see one of those applied, and also the acoustics of it. Is it going to be quieter underwater? So super eager to get out on one. I'm not sure if there'll be any in Miami, but we'll be looking for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So our main topic for today is when an electric boat is perfect for you. The first scenario is electric only or restricted lake.
Yeah, and that's where we see our most common customers. A lot of these lakes that are, some of them are either restricted because they're a drinking reservoir. There's a bunch of them in Maryland and Virginia, more local to us, where it's used as a reservoir for potable water. And they got tired, either a couple different scenarios there. They either got tired of purifying the water, or they just made it electric only right off the back, so they don't have to deal with the extra purification and filtration of getting any oils or any algae or anything that could be produced from the emissions from it. Because once you introduce that into a waterway, there's a lot that can start happening. And whether it's restricting it for fishing or for on the gas side. There's a lot of municipalities that do it, and some of those are the quietest, prettiest lakes that are out there. There's some in Minnesota, but we've sold a couple up there, but a lot in Maryland, and it's crazy because some of these bass fishermen, they've got some of the best fishing, and they're mounting like dual 20 or 30 horsepower electric outboards on them on these like small John boats. Sometimes it's the coolest things, because some of them are big, they're decent size. They just have restrictions on the waterways, but a lot of people, whether they're fishing them or they living on the lake, they're restricted to electric only. So it turns into your only option there.
All right, and then the next scenario is low speed or protected waterway. And I can say, here in Austin, we have a river that runs right through the middle of town, and that is electric boat only.
Yeah, I've seen the retro boats there, man. They're like the perfect use case for it. And, a lot of people have been to Newport Beach, California, and rented like the Duffys and the Vision Marine boats. But when you've got some of these waterways, they can be a fairly good size, but it's a no wake zone through the entire thing. So you don't really need a higher horsepower application to go, 5 knots through the entire thing. We've got a lot of no wake zones here in Virginia Beach, and I mean, it's some of the prettiest areas. You've got like State Park on one side and then like huge houses on the other. So it ends up being like a good boat ride. And as long as you set expectations right, you're not going out for this thrilling ride or anything. Cruising out at sunset with a drink in your hand, I mean, it's a good time. I never hear people complain when you're out on the water.
Absolutely. So the next scenario is no fuel. You don't want to mess with fuel. You hate fueling up.
Yeah, and that can go a couple different ways. We've got some people that are out on lakes, some of those sizable lakes, and they might have a marina or two out there, but they don't have fuel. A fuel station and pump and storage tanks is super expensive for a marina to install. And it could be upwards of $1 million. That's the quotes we just got at our marina. And if there's no marina nearby with fuel, you might be dragging your fuel cans down the dock, whether it's in a wagon or a massive gas caddy. I mean, that's normal life for a lot of people. And most of those, they've got electricity on their dock, whether it's for a boat lift or the other electric uses there. And so sometimes it just makes sense. You look at San Diego Harbor, the entire bay over there, there's only fuel at the top side of it. You can go, 10 miles south, and there's no fuel at any of the marinas. And I'm not sure if there's a reason for it, but I know it's a pain point there. I've been chatting with some of the operators, so it makes electric much more attractive, either when you don't have fuel on your lake or it's super expensive. Some of these marinas know what they got, and whether they paid a ton of money to put their system in or they're just trying to make a profit, and they've got huge margins on it. Typically you can find it, it's $1 or $2 more expensive than gas on land. And, there's some guys that'll pull their boats, put them on trailers to go fill it up. Or if they're transporting it there for the weekend, it's not that big of a deal. But if you live on the lake or you're staying on the lake and there's no marina fuel, it can be a huge pain. But, even some of those guys that do it, dragging down gas cans is not fun, especially if you've got a bigger boat. You might be filling up, 10 5-gallon jugs of gas and transporting that. It's a chore, and you have to do that in addition to all the stuff you're doing to the regular gas boat, whether it's the maintenance or even just the cleaning. It becomes a chore in this part-time job that you're doing, whether you're doing it before you're getting on the boat or after you're getting on the boat. But either way, it's not very enjoyable. So it's definitely one of the benefits of an electric boat.
Okay, so the next scenario is if you hate maintenance, repairs, and winterizing.
Yeah, whether it's bust out at another 1,000 or best day of a boater's life is when they buy the boat or sell the boat. Maintenance is obviously one of the worst problems with this, and most of that stems from the gasoline engine on there. In terms of maintenance on these things, there's not a lot. Some of these that have an outdrive, you might have an oil change you have to do once a year, but most of these boats don't have that, and you have no maintenance other than doing some zincs, the sacrificial anodes, depending on your waterway and if you're leaving it in the water. But other than that, there's no regular routine maintenance, no oil changes, no tune-ups. Most of them don't even have a winterization procedure. You might do some bilge pumps, a few years down the road, or some seawater pumps down the road. But everything that was tied to the gas propulsion system, that gas engine, you don't have to worry about anymore. And that's the worst of it. I mean, some of these, you're doing water pumps every 3 or 4 years ahead of time, just proactively, because you don't want them failing. And that gets worse and worse the older a boat gets. So it becomes more beneficial. But either way, nobody can say they enjoy that stuff. The maintenance, the repairs, that's that part-time job you inherit when you buy that boat. And that's what most people don't anticipate. And a lot of dealers, they're not warning you about that stuff because that would not help them sell the boat. But they've got a service department to make money off of you when you need all that work. They're happy to take care of you then. But either way, it's definitely one of the big downsides to it. And we've been attracting more. We've sold probably 10-15% of our boat owners. That was the biggest point with them buying a boat. And 2 out of those 3 that bought them, they had never owned a boat before. So now you could say that barrier to entry, or that purchasing, the reasoning and the thought process behind it. Now, if it's not as, big and scary to own a boat because of all this maintenance, now more people might be interested in boating. So it's really going to be interesting to see. We do a lot of surveys and customer feedback calls with our customers to see, and that's one of the metrics we're tracking is their main motivator for buying a boat. And the lack of maintenance and winterization and oil changes and just constant tune-ups is one of them. It's a big deal.
What percentage of modern boats, once you would go and buy brand new, would you say are carbureted?
No, fuel injection's pretty much on everything. And that's usually not a big part of it. Ethanol is a big problem, dealing with that, clogging up stuff. If you don't get out, put any kind of stabilizers in there over the winter. But ethanol can really eat some stuff up. And some people have the option of paying a premium to get it without ethanol, but everyone doesn't have that luxury. So you're constantly running gas through that thing. But it can be a huge headache.
All right. So the next reason is you don't need the noise and you enjoy serenity.
Yeah. And, we get a lot of sailboaters that like these things because they're used to going out there on the water and just hearing the water, just that sound of the water fouling. It's almost therapeutic. And don't get me wrong, there's some people, and I used to be one myself, biggest gearhead, you need that exhaust, everyone can appreciate that rumble or that noise or, that soul that boat has. And if that's a requirement, sure, stick with the gas boat. But a lot of people realize pretty quickly they don't need that. We see that a lot in the automotive world, and these guys are getting Ford Lightnings and Rivians and Silverados, and they're like, wow, I don't miss it. Or they end up getting a rental or something that ends up being a gas vehicle. They're like, man, it kind of feels like an antique. You didn't realize how much you hate a transmission. But, if you need that in your boat and your car, if you need that exhaust, if you need those fumes, then sure, go ahead and buy that. But if you realize that you don't, or it's not a requirement to hear that, wasted efficiency of your gas engine, then it's not a big deal.
Yeah. And the big difference between cars and boats is that cars, you get that cool sound, you speed up, and then you kind of coast and just kind of cruise, and then it gets quiet. That doesn't happen on a boat, right? It just stays at that high RPM and that loud noise.
Right. It almost becomes like a droning noise, and I've had some buddies with some big trucks with lifted tires and, a loud exhaust, and it's like cruising at 60, 70 miles an hour. That is not enjoyable. You could hardly hear the radio, any of it. And I've done that on some gas boats before, and don't get me wrong, it was like a cool cigarette boat. And it was great for a little bit, but afterwards, it's like you can't talk to each other. It's not as cool anymore when you're at speed.
Exactly. It's like driving around in second gear.
Right. And it's just one of the biggest things I noticed with riding an electric motorcycle. I was next to a buddy. I had a Zero and he had the Harley Livewire, and we were next to each other at a stoplight, and he says something to me, and I look over. I was like, whoa, we can have a conversation. We don't have to have intercom and everything else. And our helmets were on, full face helmets. And we can have a conversation because it's not loud as hell right next to you.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a different experience. And like I said, some people need and appreciate that. Cool. If that's you, then this isn't for you. You don't have to buy it. That's the beauty of a free market.
So the next one is if you have power on your dock, whether that's 110 or 220 volt.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people don't have that. And there's been a handful of instances where we couldn't sell a boat to somebody because they've got that little cabin out on the lake that might only have a 100 amp panel, and to upgrade it and run 50 amps out to the dock might be cost prohibitive. But majority of the time, if you've got a boat lift out there, you've already got 220 and 50 amp. So as long as you've got electricity on your dock or at your marina, as long as you've got, we say 30 amps is usually, it's usually a minimum for the bigger boats. But for the regular cocktail boats, anything low speed, 48 volts or less, more than likely, you're going to be okay with a 110 outlet. You don't even need 220. And I've seen some people run some heavy duty, 10 gauge extension cords literally 100 feet down their dock to plug in. I'm not encouraging that, but I've seen it done. So as long as you've got 110 on your dock, it's sufficient. But otherwise, I don't recommend it. It'd be like owning an electric car, not being able to charge at home. It's not going to be a good experience.
Right. So the next one is concerned about CO2 or fume explosion from inboard motors.
Yeah, and honestly, this is a sad one. Whether it's kids getting poisoned on the back of a boat from CO2, there's a couple every summer, and it's sad. They call it a silent killer, and you'll see warning signs for it at boat shows and stuff. But I mean, it happens way too often. And the other side of that is fumes building up, inside the cabin. If you've got an inboard, and whether you just filled up or you've got some leaks in an older boat, there's boat explosions all the time, and it's all just from the simple mistake of forgetting to run a blower. And I read into them every time I see them, and sometimes it's just, oh, the owner was on his phone, or hey, he was distracted and talking to the dock hand and just started it up without running his blower to get the fumes out. And then the boat literally explodes. It's not like, oh, it catches fire, there's smoke, and you get time to get away from it. No, the boats will blow up in half. People go flying. I mean, it's just an absolute mess. It's terrible. But that doesn't come up too often in conversation when you're talking about pros and cons of gas versus electric or any of that. But it's pretty serious. And there's a lot of people that, when you're talking about safety, that is a concern of theirs, and they think about it. And a lot of times it's because they know somebody or a neighbor on the lake, or, something happened. But it's an unfortunate side of gas boats, and we don't bring it up, obviously, too much when we're talking about them. But it's definitely one of the benefits of not having to worry about it.
So Eric, what are some use cases, so the optimum use cases for electric boats?
I want to preface this by saying we very much say the right boat for the right job. You're not gonna, if you're the guy that needs to go deep sea fishing or wakeboarding all day long. I've got friends that have said, oh, all we do is go tubing all day long. And then I'll clarify and like, okay, but how much of that is anchoring out and just enjoying the boat, relaxing in a cove or anchored at a sandbar? So he's like, no, we just go tubing all the time. It's like, well, energy density isn't there, so use case might not be a good match. But if you're the average boater that's spending, 20, 30 miles in an average day on your waterway, then it makes sense. And it's always going to be a case-by-case basis. This one, we literally will sit down with someone and have them show us on a map what their day looks like. And it's, hey, I go to this restaurant and this sandbar, and we go to this beach. And, if all of that is less than 30 miles or so, great, this works. But, I mean, we had someone from the boat show that wanted to buy a boat, and he says, oh, yeah, the furthest I go is this restaurant. We go there usually once a month or so, but it's 52 miles away. It's like, whoa, okay, like that exceeds the current tech. And don't get me wrong, we could build a boat for him, a bigger boat with a lot of batteries, but it's going to be a $300,000-$400,000 boat probably. So we're brutally honest in the use cases. And if you're the average pleasure boater under 30 miles, great, perfect. But anything outside of that, we try not to force it, because it's going to end up as a miserable experience. And the other side of it, we kind of touched on the ferries, but work boats also. We're chatting with a handful of people with work boats right now, whether it's oyster farmers or crabbers. And a lot of those guys are local to where they're working. And a lot of them aren't going fast. They've usually got like big barges or work boats that, they're not out there doing 20, 30 knots. We've got a handful in our bay that are oyster farmers. They're doing 6 knots, and they go about a mile each way to their work site and compared to where their marina is that they start off. A lot of those end up having a huge surface area, which is prime for solar, low loads while they're idling there working on stuff. They've just got some hydraulics usually running. So we're working on 2 different projects right now to see if we can make them electric. Same with like those pedal boats, the tiki boats. None of those things are going over, 5, 10 knots. They are cruising at very low speeds when they're loaded with people. So they make sense for electric as well. And, weight doesn't become an issue. They're not up on planing speed. But a lot of those things are a lot bigger. We're chatting with somebody right now with a 32-foot pontoon that we're going to put electric motors on. But the weight isn't as big of a problem, and you've got a ton more options on where you need to place batteries as opposed to, a small bow rider or a small deck boat. So it becomes a lot easier when you get to the larger, whether it's a work boat or a pontoon or any kind of barge. It just becomes a lot more flexible with the options that we have on there.
Yeah, I've seen at least one electric cargo ship, which seems like the worst possible use case, and yet they're still doing it.
And I wonder how much of that like actually makes sense, because they've all got like diesel backup generators. It's like, okay, is that generator running all the time, and you're just doing this for greenwashing and because there was some federal money or state money or whoever funded the thing? Because a lot of times on those long distance trips, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it all comes down to energy consumption per use or per day or per trip. And if someone's burning, 50 gallons of gasoline in a day, it's going to be pretty hard to make electric work in those use cases. Batteries usually are, 6 to 8 times as energy dense. Water is 800 times more dense than air. Like all the variables are against you when you're talking about gas versus electric, and they don't make sense every time. But we're brutally honest, and we try not to say that it'll fit in every application. And I think that's what triggers a lot of people. As soon as you say everyone's going to go electric, it's like, no, there's a lot of use cases that can't be electric, or they can't right now with the current tech that we have. Sure, if we get, what's that?
Or they shouldn't be.
You're right. Sometimes it doesn't make sense, and a lot of people don't realize that. And whether you're extremist on one side or the other, we try to stay pretty realistic and grounded and down to earth. And I usually listen to physics more than I listen to opinions or budgets or greenwashing, because I don't know, we just end up making a lot more progress that way.
Right. Alrighty, well, I think that's all we have for today. I do want to get a quick plug for the Tiny Boat Nation podcast. They did a quick episode on electric boats. Also, get subscribed to Aqua Electric, the YouTube channel. Erick's going to have an episode on there. What's that going to be about?
It was kind of just like a fireside chat style conversation. I don't know, I like to think I'm pretty knowledgeable in terms of electric boats, and chatting with people, there isn't a lot of people that I look up to or learn from, or super eager to pull information from, that have been exposed to more than I have. And Justin's one of them, man. He's a super sharp guy. He's more than just a YouTuber. He really knows his stuff. He's a 100-ton boat captain. That's his day job, is moving boats around, but super savvy guy, very realistic, no greenwashing there. But yeah, it was just a fireside chat, kind of just about the industry, where things are going, chat a little bit about hydrogen randomly. But yeah, it was just some good conversation with a really smart guy. It was great to chat with.
Get subscribed and looked out for that. We also want to plug the Green Boater, which is another excellent electric boat podcast. And that's about it. So you've been listening to the Electrified Marina Podcast, brought to you by Electrified Marina and electrifiedmarina.com. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please do share with your friends. Please leave us a comment or question or literally anything, and write the numbers 1 through 5 in the comment section, and that will help us to reach more people and spread our message. Thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.